No, thank you very much. Security impact of configuration management. And as I was introduced as Lamont Peterson, I do want to just give you a little bit of information about me. There are many in the room, and I recognize faces, many I don't, but I've been around the open source community in Utah since 1997 when I first moved to Utah, but my Linux experience goes back to 1994. Probably, truthfully, I got another month or two before you can say it's 20 years, but it's a lot of time with Linux and other open source software, and there's been a lot of change over the years. We have got some very cool tools, and we have a very cool conference, don't we? Yes. Yes. All right. Industry experience, work experience. I did spend some years at Guru Labs. I wrote all the books, or at least wrote in all the books, if not wrote them from scratch so much. But reworking that material, you do a lot of deep research. And the security books in particular were always a lot of fun. And you start getting into that vein some more, and you can get into some mindset, and you start seeing things that you didn't see before. There are those people who can get lost in that, and there are those people who don't get the opportunity to be lost in that. For the last 6+ years, I've been at Intermountain Healthcare. We're managing 1,200 Linux Solaris AIX systems, where I'm doing things now, and we're running thousands of apps, including things that when servers go down, we have to shut the doors on emergency departments. So for us, it is important to do things right, and it is important that we don't break certain things. Some things can go down, and you still have end users that are upset, right? Anywhere, any business. But some things are a little more critical in some industries than others. And I have worked with a variety of other industry areas and organizations over the years. But let me just ask the question, simple question here, right? Does configuration management pose any security risks? What's the answer?
Yes. Yes.
Yes and depends. Both good answers. But yes was the answer in the synopsis for this session. So I see some of you read that. Does configuration management provide you any security benefits? Provide you security benefits? Yes, absolutely it does. Therefore, is CM worth it? Maybe this isn't the question that's quite so easy to answer right off the cuff in the context of what we're talking about here today. But what is that? Let's start by just hitting the glossary for a moment. Configuration management, all sorts of things over the years, over the decades, that we call configuration management. Includes your VCS types of areas, your software configuration management types of areas. Let me just ask, in compiling our software, what is the most common open source tool used to configure before you compile? There you go, right. I mean, we see autoconf in the configure, make, install, right? Make being something that we use quite a lot, right? Those kinds of terms, yeah, those are out there. Not what we're talking about. However, don't forget to apply these things because they're going to exist in your organization anyway. And as we go into the configuration management that we're talking about here today, you do need to keep them in mind. You're going to deal with them. You may even leverage them to help in some other aspects. So what is configuration management? System and app administration types of tools. That's what I'm talking about today. You can manage your configuration. You can manage your services, your systems. You can start and stop applications. You can run scripts just from a systems administration point of view to check things, to fix things, whatever it is. And you can audit. Now, this is a very important point, especially when we talk about security. You can audit for both your consistencies and your variations. Why is that important? Why is it important to audit that your variations? Because, anybody? Got an answer?
Expected state, whatever it
Expected state. Very good answer. The expected state may be the same thing, identical, on 10,000 servers. Or it may be, here's 1,000 servers in one cluster and here's 2 in another. And they have completely different configuration. And it could be that you're in a shop that you have 30 servers total, and you only have maybe 3 or 4 pairs of things and everything else is separate. That doesn't mean that configuration management tools like this cannot give you some benefits, both as administrators and in the realm of security. Today, the goal I have for you is understanding managing multiple systems at varying scales. It could be a shop of 30 servers. It could be a shop of thousands. What are the potential risks? But don't ignore real-world things, right? We're in here today. We're discussing this. We're not managing real systems. We're not here trying to plan how are we going to deal with this project or this particular application. This is sort of the lab environment. But I want to keep the real world in mind as we do things. You go out there and you say, hey, the right way to do this is. Here you go. But the reality is, in our organization, we've got this concern, or we've always dealt with that, or the politics are here, and those things exist. And we want to make sure that you improve security in using configuration management. And I say improve security. I don't say maintain at least the status quo, right? Think about that one. Some of the methods that you can use. Who in here has ever done the manual method? Right? Have you done this exact command before too? I mean, is that pretty close? You know, sometimes you actually put a script here that you're running and let it do its thing. But yeah, this is not an invalid method either. Sometimes you just got something quick to go look at and it's a one-time thing. You whip up a script, you go run it, and you're done. Then in a month when they say, hey, that was awesome, can you do it again? That's when you want to start to automate that or bring it into your configuration management, start capturing some new metric you weren't capturing before. Centralized configuration distribution, VCS type of tools, can do this for you. You can get on the box and you can say, pull down the new version of the config file. You can run a script or a manual command that does that on each of the servers in the group. This is a good thing because the idea being you have a consistent control over which version of something is installed on each of the boxes, and your script can then restart the services or tell them to reread the configuration. Those are very frequent ways of doing it. You might use other tools besides just the 4i and list of things, do SSH, some command. You can do the PSSH, CSSH, PDSH. These are all kinds of things that we have seen and used out there, and they have their different areas. You know, PDSH was designed for certain specific niche with large compute clusters in academia and scientific types of things. The way that it works is thus a little bit different. Its command syntax lends itself towards that area a little bit more. Expect, another great tool to make use of, so that you can automate some kind of a script in order to hit things and do a lot of stuff with it. And maybe you've used that or some of these other things with your custom tools. These scripts usually are born of the frustration or the getting your back against the wall, or I just don't have time to SSH to 300 servers every day. And so you create some kind of custom tools that do that. At Intermountain Healthcare, I've worked with another colleague who is gifted with Tickle, and in that, using Expect, we've built some tools that allow us to create users, change our passwords, modify some other user administrative aspects, but we also have a mass exec, some other command type of capability where we can just gather things. We can mass upload and mass download files so we can look at things. Simple tools, built with Expect. They handle, and it's taken a lot of work because every time we ran into something different on this version of AIX or that version of, you know, Red Hat or CentOS or something, we had to go and say, okay, what are we, oh, the command prompt looks different in some way. You know, we've come up with solutions for those things. It's been a great tool because it allows me to change my password every 90 days on 1,200 machines in about 3 minutes. Not a bad thing to have going on. Now, there are other ways to, of course, deal with something like that. And before I go, sorry, next slide. Combinations of these things are what you're usually seeing people do in their environments before they come to a configuration management solution. And those types of configuration management solutions for things like passwords, Kerberos, LDAP, or better than doing it all manually, free IPA. A lot of shops have Active Directory going on. Okay, fewer than I thought I would see. It is not uncommon to see Unix systems that talk to Active Directory in many Fortune 500 and so forth. In my experience and travels, I've seen that too. And Active Directory is a lot better performance and scalability-wise than it was, 14 years ago when it first came out. But various other types of directory services and so forth to manage your user accounts. There are advantages and drawbacks to that approach, and we'll talk about some of that as well. But I'm really thinking about these types of tools, whether it is your authentication stuff or, in particular, using something like Salt or even Spacewalk. Now, these are two different tools. They cover certain different areas of things, and the two don't conflict with each other. They complement each other very well. You use Spacewalk to manage and provide your software repositories and packages through its channels and such, and then you use Salt to do your other things. Or maybe you use Chef or Puppet or something else, but that's okay. Some of the pros and cons of all of these. The efficiencies that configuration management can bring you versus the complexities that it can introduce. It is, with configuration management, a true statement. Yeah. We like that. It's also true that you can brick thousands of systems in one fell swoop, you're done. Not to, that's right. And not to scare you too much, because remember, you can even repair pretty easily your thousands of systems. In most cases, oh, we bricked that thing really bad. We did power off and everything. Well, maybe Salt doesn't give you the ability to run a single command to power them all on. Depends on your environment. You might be able to script something, but you may be going over and going, or that might be in your virtualization thing. So we do want to keep that in mind. It is an area where that complexity can grow. It can become easy. We write all sorts of scripts. We do our jobs every day. We know what we're doing. And we never make mistakes. Right. So the key thing there is, remember, testing. Very important when you're using configuration management. And that has a huge security impact too. You want to make sure you test the things that you're doing, because you make a change that opens up for a vulnerability, or you revert some or damage some security tool that's on the systems, or circumvent it. That could be a problem. So you want to watch out for those type of things as well. Repeatable consistency. Yes? Question?
Do you find it prudent or even necessary to have a testing environment that operates on a different security? It emulates the security systems enough to duplicate the tests, but isn't part of the security system for live. Do you find that prudent and necessary?
Do I find it prudent and necessary to have testing environments to match production to an extent that we can say this is, but it is separated stacks and so forth, where if we did impact the test, we wouldn't impact the prod. I would say yes. However, let's bring that real world thing back in, right? Even in some large shops, it can be difficult in some cases to have adequate testing environments for everything that you have going on. At Intermountain Healthcare, we have production and we have testing, and we have development and a couple of different stacks like that. And there's a progression for code promotions or other types of changes that we're making, where we do all of those things in the non-prod environments first. It is valuable. You want to make, if you can, great. If you can't, you want to try to at least get one thing that covers a lot of areas that are common, right? When you're dealing with these kind of configuration management tools, the first low-hanging fruit that you're going to be pulling off the tree are the common things. Doesn't matter what app is running on here or here or here. These are all running Java apps. These are all running Perl apps. Doesn't matter. You're going to be able to get those common things from them and then start working your way up that tree a bit. In doing so, testing can easily start with one kind of common environment to play in that regard. I would recommend it.
I guess, more specifically, do you find it necessary to segregate those systems to the point that permission sets are different? In other words, your QA group has one block of permissions, and then your user group has a different block of permissions.
Well, Intermountain Healthcare, we're healthcare industry, we're hospitals and so on and so forth. So we have some extra regulatory issues where developers and QA are not allowed the same kind of access in production that's necessary for some of that kind of testing. And so that's part of a justification that lets us get some of those environments, if you know what I mean. Your industry may not have quite so much with that. There are regulatory issues, which I plan to bring up in here. Right, all that kind of stuff, exactly, that do play a role in things as well. So it's having certain types of separations. There's that basic principle of least privilege, right? The QA staff, what kind of access do they need in the production environment? It's not to say necessarily none. It depends on what the scope of their role and their team. Are they doing just QA, or are they QA and end user support? There could be all sorts of variables to consider there. And that's where the real world, I love the question. It's a great question. Thank you very much. I appreciate you doing that and speaking up, and everybody else for thanking you to do that as well with their applause, right? Am I making the hand subtle enough? Thank you. The real world realities are going to be, the exact answer will come down to what is going on in your environment. But that is a fundamental question that I do think you must ask yourself. Absolutely. Did I answer it adequately? Thank you. Repeatable consistency. We'll come back to this. This is a huge benefit in my mind. Am I alone? No? Okay. That's good. The repeatable consistency. I am a big fan of RPM. I'm less of a fan of Deb file format for various, that's just my own color, whatever. But the benefits that Debian packaging bring and that RPM packaging bring are the same in this list. Repeatable consistency, right? I go to build that RPM on a different box. What's different on that box from where I was before might be a newer version of a library. But if everything else is equal, I will produce the same functioning from the binary I get. Now, the compilers are not perfect at producing exactly every 1 and 0's binary the same each time. There's optimization stuff that some decisions are fuzzy or some decisions are random. And there are good security mechanisms around the randomization of the internals of our binaries. But what I mean by that is, here's the process. We've got that down. We know what the recipe is. We know what to do to configure and compile and where to put the files and how to manage them and how to label them. Great stuff. In the same way as RPM or some other package management approach lets you make an individual package consistent. We also have systems like Yum, apt-get, aptitude, that help us to deal with those interdependencies between them. And that gives us a greater consistency. Tools like Spacewalk let us make that consistency easy to access. Tools like Salt can then let us do the same kinds of things in our system configurations outside of RPM. How many of you have a system in your shop that has vendor-supplied applications? right? Okay. Do those vendors provide that as a convenient RPM or other similar type of a thing? In some cases. In some cases, they are horrendously malformed. And they get redone by me when I, absolutely have to type of thing. But that is, thankfully, few and far between. The consistency that you get from using these tools has significant security advantages. And it can be a security disadvantage as well. You have some kind of a vulnerability that comes up, I don't know, Heartbleed. And we dealt with that in Intermountain. In fact, I ended up being one of the people who was kind of right in the middle of it because I built the spacewalk and such that we have. And so going and checking, okay, what version is vulnerable, what version is not. And we had all these systems that are not vulnerable at all. Here's a list of some that are. Do we have the package? Make sure we've got that in place and go through and do the update on all those machines. So we had the newer version of OpenSSL that was not a risk. That's an easy thing. Having your configuration be consistent lets you solve that problem faster, but it also means, from the security risk perspective, your systems are all identical. If somebody figures out a way into one, they may be able to get into any of them. That's not to advocate that you should use Apache on this server and Nginx on that one, just because, right? Don't overcomplicate your life in that regard. The consistency will lead to better security. But the conversion to having those consistencies, this can be a complicated thing. So if you are not already using configuration management, tools like Salt or so forth, and just by a show of hands, how many are using something of that nature already? Great. That's good. And those of you who are not, why not? Ask yourself that question, okay? And hopefully we'll give you some answers for that question as well. But one of those reasons why not is, there's a fair bit of work to do. In doing that conversion work, you want to take this opportunity to stop and look at it and say, maybe we should configure PAM so that password minimums are like 12 characters on our systems while we're in the process of doing all of this conversion. Right? You can give yourself that opportunity to improve security, but you also want to be on the lookout for those things that could detract from it. You don't want to create new holes and spread them everywhere, or take a new hole that only exists because of this one application and spread it everywhere either. But again, that's those similarities versus the variations that you need to keep in mind. We'll come into that thinking as well. Just a little summary of some pros and cons here. One that I didn't cover yet, right here, where you have a powerful client-server architecture. If the server is down, you may have staff who can't do anything. And this isn't necessarily as much of a security problem right away, although it could be. If there's some kind of a breach or incident or hint of such a problem and that server happens to be down, it may be more difficult for you to gather data, gather some log files, et cetera, from your systems. These don't go down very often, so that's not a big worry, but it is something to remember and keep in mind. When you are trying to get configuration management in, what is one of those risks? Well, if it's down, that could make it a little more difficult. But while it's running, that architecture takes care of things in very efficient ways. I won't go into more depth there because we've got other sessions at the conference this week that'll take care of that for you. The management of users and groups. Like I said, we created a tool so I could change my password on, and I've got multiple different Unix and Linux flavors and versions. And yet that one tool knows how to get in and deal with each of those systems. If my password has actually expired, when I log in, it says, you're forced to change it right now. It recognizes that. This is great and works for a certain subset of users, like an administration team who has the account on all the machines. trying to bring that kind of user administration in wholesale in a configuration management system on its own is not really the best tool for the job. So I wouldn't recommend that, except for maybe some of those core users. You might use it for something like that instead of creating your own tool. A few fundamental security concepts, and let's discuss how these apply to configuration management. I always like to start with this one. Remember, there's no such thing as secure. And gentlemen, when you go home at night and you lock your front door, do you really think that that lock on the door is keeping anybody out?
Only the honest one.
Exactly. That is a piece of security about keeping honest people honest. That doesn't make it an invalid piece of security.
That's why you get a big dog.
That's why you get a big dog. That's right. You have a doorknob with a lock and you have a deadbolt. There's a reason why there are those two things. I've seen front doors where the main handle or little thingy or whatever doesn't have a lock at all. You've just got the deadbolt. That's a good secure mechanism because of the physics behind it. But if somebody really wants to get in, they can do it. Thankfully, that's less than 1% of our population usually that are after that kind of nefarious thing. On top of which, do I really need to spend the money putting in a steel door with, vault type of bolts in the sides and everything on my house? Well, if I do that, I got to keep going, right? Got to take care of the windows, got to take care of the walls, got to take care of the roof, basement access, et cetera, et cetera. And there could be an awful lot of expense.
Just for curiosity's sake, in Russia, that's what they have.
Yeah.
The front door, the bolts that go in every direction when you lock the front door.
Yep. It's not you'll see that in New York City in some places. But the locks are easy to pick, huh? I did not hear that. Yeah. But yeah, that's the thing is, even with all of that mechanism, if the lock itself is easy to get through, then it might not be worth that much. No, why would I do all of that? I mean, honestly, at home, what I have that is of value is not that valuable. I'm not attracting that kind of risk. What's your risk level? Right? That's what being secure is. How do we define that term? To be secure. We say, oh yeah, we're secure. Because we've got that little checkbox on our website that says, hey, when you spend your credit card here, we are secure. PCI, or various other things that you might be doing as well. The definition of what is secure. Security management is all about risks. It's risk management. How much risk do I have? You need to be able to assess that, right? What does it cost to break through that security that I have? What's the risk that there are people who want to break through it?
How much noise will they make and how long can you delay them?
How long can you delay them? Excellent questions, absolutely. Because the quality of that security versus the value of the information, the value of the system, the value of the contents of my house, versus the cost of breaking in. If you're going to expend more resources to get into my house to steal my 7-year-old LCD TV, you're just not going to get very much money out of it. But please, lend me your ears here on this one. This is important. Do not fall in the trap of only thinking about that monetarily. Dollars is not the only answer. The enemy out there has other things that they value. They may value breaking you because it's fun. They may have really deep pockets. It doesn't matter if it costs $1 million to break through. Why would we not do it? Because, this, that, and the other. But why would we do it? Oh, we'll steal their trade secrets. Maybe it's only worth $100,000 worth of trade secrets, but it does set them back, and we're kind of at war with our competitor. There could be other values to think about. So don't fall in the trap when you're trying to sell this to management or to security staff to say, dollars and cents is the only metric. There are other things that can be more powerful arguments, actually. The best security that you have is invisible. Any thoughts on that one?
Is that always true? I mean, don't you want sometimes people to know that you have good security? I mean, don't you want it to be obvious? Put the little sign on the lawn.
Put the little sign on the lawn. I've got the picture in my phone. I should have thought of that, pulling that picture out to show it, because that's perfect. I was at a parade in some city in Utah, and I saw, I'm sorry, set that aside. And I saw a sign on a business door: "These premises may be protected by electronic surveillance." If you're going to go for the fake camera in the corner with the little light that blinks, don't say "may" in that sentence, right? I thought that was hilarious, so I did take a picture of that one. No, it's a very good point. There is a good reason to have visible security, and there are good things that come from it. Let's think about 9/11. Obvious example, right? Then we go to the airport. Anybody do some traveling before 9/11 and then after? Very different world. While at Guru Labs, I was gone for 90 weeks in 4.5 years. It's about 40% for those of you doing the math. And I got pretty darn good at getting through security there. There's an awful lot of security theater. It's just for show. But right after 9/11, especially shortly thereafter, it was important. And you're right. It's a very good point. It was important for other reasons, not necessarily just security itself, but it did act as a deterrent. Right? They could visibly see there were changes going on. So somebody who had some nefarious intentions might say, wow, I don't know, I knew what to do 3 months ago, but now things are changing. And I see some stuff, but I'm sure there's got to be stuff I don't see. Right? The best security is also invisible, means that security mechanisms that don't get in the way. Right? If you've got a salesman who now has to spend 10 minutes instead of 3 to get this order form filled out because of all these security mechanisms that have been put on, that's not very invisible. And that might be a business impact that you'd have to worry about.
Just a quick comment. That kind
Please.
of goes back to, if you make your password requirements so complicated, people will just write it down in front of their computer.
Absolutely. There is that. Now, I might shock you by telling you that when I change my password, I do so by generating a list that I put on a piece of paper. That piece of paper gets destroyed fairly soon because I memorize using it. And the passwords I use are generated by cryptographically secure pseudorandom number generation techniques. Say that one twice fast. And you're right, though. You make it too complex, most end users aren't going to figure out how to deal with it other than writing things down. So invisible security can be a good thing. Security that doesn't make itself obvious and get in the way of people, but also when you go through the airport, there are actual changes that occurred from 9/11 that you do not see, that are going on there. There's some real security value to some of that stuff, but there's also some theater. And the value of the theater was more economic than it was necessarily security or safety. Your security team are often not the ones who do the implementing. If you work in a larger shop where you have a completely separate security group, you may find that they are quite busy. There are breaches that occur. There are new technologies coming along. There are things that have to be certified. Can we have iPhones and iOS 7, or can we have Android, or can we do this, or can we do that? I've got this app I want to use because it's going to be great for better than the one that comes with my desktop system. And then when I play solitaire, I'll have a better time doing it. Those are some of those different things that you want to think about. The security team, may not be dealing with implementing, but that doesn't mean that the security team is not doing a lot of valuable work, but it ends up being invisible work. So it goes back to that previous point. There's a lot of good security that's invisible to the users, invisible to you as system administrators. And in conjunction with that, these 2 points kind of go together. Your operations staff, sometimes they're your only, and sometimes they're not the only, but they're really a great resource as a first line of defense. So you're going to make a change to the system. Somebody brings in a request. The vendor says, I need the root password on these boxes to... Anybody got some other examples like that, right? Have you been there and seen that happen? The operations staff aren't the security staff, but they need to be security conscious, if you will, individuals for things like that. And that can be done through policy and through education and through experience and other things. But there can be subtle things that don't always go well. I encourage you, therefore, to don't go off in a vacuum with this, but do work with your security team. They have some resources, they have some perspective, and they have some training that a lot of your in-the-trench systems administration staff, application administration, app server admins and so forth don't have. We want to make sure that we take advantage of those resources on both sides. I already hinted at this a moment ago, but how many of you would agree with this statement?
More like accept, not agree.
Okay, how many of you will accept this statement? All right, got a few more hands there. The funny thing is, too, I got some hands from people who are security type of folks. Security requirements can rarely overcome business requirements. Well, this is not as true as it once was. Actually, security requirements can overcome business requirements. Why is that? What's changed?
PCI did a lot for that because they put the risk for the business in the money holders' hands.
Yeah, now the shareholders, the upper management, the liabilities that can go there with things like PCI. Let's go back in history just a wee bit to this Sarbanes-Oxley thing, SOX. That is the piece of legislation that's in our modern era probably the one that started it the most. This was a good thing to have happen. It's hard to say. Because I feel that about 1/3 of it was real and good stuff and actual security, these were right types of things to recommend and enforce. About 1/3 of it was, And, some of those things have changed and gone away a little as time has gone on, and they've evolved into better requirements as the law has been better interpreted. And about 1/3 of the things were kind of the security theater. So they have benefits, but it's not necessarily always the security benefit as it were. But it did put the liability, and for the first time we got the C-level offices to take security more seriously. And it became easier to start getting some real security into place. What's another good reason why that statement now goes without the word rarely?
Well, it's kind of two things. It's
Mm-hmm.
what you were saying to follow on. The fear of the C-suite to don the orange suit
Yeah.
is the one, and then the other is they can watch their peers in the industry, like the recent Target CEO.
Exactly.
Watch the exodus of those people and say, that could be me if I don't pay attention.
Yeah, it's taken a little bit of time, but Target CEO ends up being one of the fall guys. And that's a reality out there, folks. This is to your advantage when you do have something that you see that's not secure. You can say, yeah, we could do this better. We could be more secure. We can be proactive about it. But you have some of those challenges, right? Before we get into that, though, just a couple of more of those security fundamentals real quick. You want to always fail consistently. Why? Because you don't want to give away any information about what caused the failure. I have one client many years ago, mid-90s, security auditing kind of things going on and some other stuff. And we found that they were using a mechanism by which to lock accounts after, say, 4 failed attempts. We could lock the account, there'd be no more logging, of any attack attempts, and we could just go to the races trying passwords. And when we struck on the correct password, the failure behavior was slightly different. It still failed, but now we knew what the right password was. Then when the end users came along and said, oh, dang it, I can't get in. Call up support. Hey, yeah, I seem to have locked myself out. Oh, yeah, I typed it 3 or 4 times. I don't know. It gets unlocked. And right then and there, all of a sudden, I had access if I wanted to do something nefarious. We discovered that kind of vulnerability. There were a few other things that we found and dealt with, but that's a great example of how an inconsistent failure can lead to a circumstance by which the account is now unlocked. Other people can get in and do things with that account. How do you defend against that particular story? We recommended to them that they make the lockout at 20 attempts. Because there's no end user that sits there and goes 20 times before they call support. That's going to therefore, but 20 attempts by some remote brute force type of a thing is very little opportunity to get through the key space. So it still covers all those requirements. It was a better solution, and it worked out great for them. They did adopt that, and I didn't hear years later anything about it, but that's.
There have been to fail consistently, so you couldn't tell when it was.
Wouldn't that be great if they could have gotten the vendor that produced this stuff to make the fix? Yeah, there were some limitations to that. Those, just FYI, those limitations do exist in the PAM Tally 2 modules. Similar kinds of problems will occur with those. It's very difficult in a PAM environment to ensure consistent timing on the failure because of your varying modules and so forth. Not a great solution for that. So there are some areas where it's not necessarily solvable right off the bat. And for them, it was easier to do that change. But that's just one example for you. Principle of least privilege, while I untie my tongue. We talked about that one briefly earlier, but what I want to say here about it is don't go overboard, right? There are users who only need to have access on certain machines, and most of the time they don't need to have root. And make sure we use mechanisms that, if there's a group of users that are working with files, create a group shared directory, make sure that passwords are strong. You do all those things for those users, but also make sure that when they create files in there, you don't have to teach them the proper ins and outs of Chmod. How many of you have end users who are fantastic at using Chmod and Chgroup properly? Not me either, okay? You want those things to be automatic. Again, great security being invisible. Right? When the system just does the right thing all the time, they don't have to worry about it. People can't pick good passwords. We talked about that, let alone strong ones. Why? Why is that? Because I know this one is a big question that comes up. That's why I'm going to give you just a little taste further on the discussion of it. You've probably seen this before. Through 20 years of effort, we've successfully trained everyone to use passwords that are hard for humans to remember but easy for computers to guess. The reality of it is, and this is the gospel according to Lamont here, but the reality of it is, human brain is not capable of generating a strong password, end of story. That's why I memorize the ones that I do and so forth. I just don't have to worry about me doing something dumb as much. But there's a session on Saturday. I think it's entitled, Does This Policy Make My Password Look Fat? So you can learn some good techniques there, from what I understand, of the way that presentation will go, that you can use and that end users can use. Heck, my wife uses the method I gave her. She memorized, she can't remember anything, hardly. I mean, no, she remembers a lot of things, but it's names and passwords and birth dates aren't necessarily in her repertoire. And so, I told her one day, you can memorize stuff. I know you can remember things. You remember my name when we met. Actually, I didn't. What? Yeah, for a month there, I had to keep going. What was his name again? Anyway, so after that, I let her get into that technique. We've talked about a lot of different things. We've talked about applying those things in different ways, and we've used a few examples. Target's another great example because, they did have a lot of things going on right, but they had one or two big wrong things. And so the inconsistencies in their configuration led to a breach. So what are the challenges that you've got to deal with? Those include security management and user buy-in. So security buy-in. I think we've already kind of covered this a lot. I only want to mention it here because I want you to remember to think about this. When you're dealing with your security team, you want to work with them. For management, the bad question is, or the bad attitude is, IT is a cost center. The worst attitude is, IT security is cost without benefit. This is where SOX and PCI start to help you out. But also look for those opportunities along the lines of the invisible security to make things more secure, but make them easier to use for the end users. Make things so that there's a benefit to saving 1 minute per day of 10,000 employees. That adds up in a year. And they can agree to that kind of a thing. Operational cost reduction benefits that you can also share with them include things like this. When you're implementing something in your configuration management system, you have an investment of time up front. You invest that time once per task, and then you reuse it. And maybe you have to invest a little bit less time to tweak it the next time you use it or what have you. But then you use that effort that was put in up front, pays dividends the second time you use it, and so on and so forth. Human error. Reducing human error, because we have that consistency, because we can audit and verify. And check for the compliance with things like PCI. We can save costs because we can come in and say, those auditors, Visa, somebody else checking your PCI, if you have the tools that let you gather the data they need and you do it quickly, you make sure everything's good before they get there. That's your verification. They do their audit. You have your compliance. Maybe your insurance costs go down. Maybe, and I'll let your imagination go from there. Security improvements, we already talked about these. Thank you for the good questions that brought these things up. The corporate image, like for Target. It's been something they've been working on repairing. CIOs, they like to keep their jobs. They don't like CLMs or RGEs. Right. Career limiting moves. Resume generating events. That's right. The CEO of Target did which one of these? Yeah. That's a tough thing. Here's another one. This is less tangible because it's the right thing to do. Apple releases a new product. Microsoft, doesn't matter. They tell you, hey, guess what? We're making this out of highly recyclables and we don't have these bad things in the plastics and so on and so forth. This is better public image. And that is of value to the company. It may not be a dollar figure value, but those same kinds of things. Have you had this question asked of you before? Was it this guy asking? Right? Your end users, why change what's working? It's not my problem. So to get those guys on board with any of these kinds of changes, you need to be seeing some of those other benefits and so forth. Remember, from an end user's perspective, right? And how many of us have felt this way ourselves, too? I mean, there have been times for me as well. Not that I would apply this quote exactly in this context, but for what it's worth. We've already talked about the verification. That's you making sure things are good. Audit. That's the auditors, either internal or external, coming in and checking on compliance. This is the last big point. The balance. And we had some great questions. Where do you strike that balance? That's a question I can't exactly answer for you. It depends on your environment and so forth. But that is something you want to look at. Is this striking a good balance between things? We've already talked about all of these. I only put them here at the end to remind you. And now what I want you to remember is, what are those benefits? What are those challenges, and how do I address them? How do I overcome them? The benefits are a great way to do that. Your next question is, what is my next move? I would recommend a configuration management approach to improve security. Keep the things we've talked about and some of these other thoughts in mind. This subject could go on for hours, and I've tried to distill it down here to a few key things just to get you in the right mindset, just to get you going the right direction, but also to give you some ammunition to help you take that next step. Any other questions? No? Well, I hope that that works out for you, and that you too can live the dream. Thank you.